And hey, I also want to learn how to take a shit in a box and get a paper out of it. All right, ladies and gentlemen. I am John Beckmann, Professor John Beckmann, Dr. John Beckmann, the father of Sid, the transgenic mother of sin, your hostess with the mostest. Happy Friday. I debated literally going home today. I just said, I could either go home. I could literally just go home, take it easy, go home today, or I could stay and try to do something, And the last video I did, the reaction video on Nassim Taleb's fight with Bill Gates, that was like a decent movie. That got me some decent hits, some decent likes, some decent comments. If you have comments and likes, hit like, hit share, hit subscribe, throw them in the chat. But that worked out pretty well. So I'm going to try another reaction video. This one, I have not watched this video yet, but I saw this when I was browsing on YouTube and I saw this video. The video is How to Write a Paper in a Weekend by Professor Pete Carr. And Pete Carr, I never met him before, never knew of him, but I think he's at University of Minnesota. I looked him up. At least I looked him up. Faculty member at University of Minnesota Department of Chemistry. So at my alma mater, my undergraduate was at University of Minnesota. And the first time I saw this thing popped up on my feed, I refused to watch it because it just bothered me. Okay, how to write a paper in a weekend. Essentially, like my first thought was, how to write a paper in a weekend. Okay, let me tell you how to take a box, open it up, take a shit in it, and then close the box and wrap it up and put a bow on it. That's how to write a paper in a weekend. That was literally like my first reaction. That was what went through my head, was like, there's no way in hell you can write a good paper in a weekend. My impression of what he was, again, I have not watched it yet, so I have no idea. And I don't want to hate on this person. I'm not hating on this person. Never met him before. No idea. I'm hating on the idea that you can write a good paper in a weekend. And my impression of it was not necessarily that you're just writing it up. Like, sure, you could write something up in a weekend, but the idea that like you can all of a sudden like think of a new theory or think of a robust idea that nobody's ever thought of before and like do some experiments or get some data and then like write it up all in a weekend. That is insane. That's impossible. Nobody could ever do that. And the paper would be complete trash. So the idea to me was like, okay, let me teach you how to write a real shitty paper, was how I was thinking of it. Now, I don't know. I'm excited to watch this video. It could be, the pitch could be like, okay, you have all the experiments done. Now you just need to write it up. And so it's like, okay, how do you motivate yourself to write a paper in a weekend? Maybe that's the deal. I don't know. But I'm about to watch it. Again, I'm not going to give hate on this person because this person is a YouTube creator. So I'm not going to, it's not worth my time to hate on people. But I am interested in just like seeing if my initial impression of this was correct or if it was completely wrong. Maybe there will be some good ideas that I learned. And hey, I also want to learn how to take a shit in a box and get a paper out of it. So like, I'm interested to see. All right, here we go. Ready, 3, 2, 1, play.
Hi, I'm Professor Carr, University of Minnesota, Department of Chemistry. I'd like to talk to you this afternoon about how to go about writing a research paper. Over the years, I and my group have produced about 400 papers.
This already is just starting to bother me. Again, like, okay, and this is going to bother some people, not others. There's a huge debate in science of like quantity versus quality. And I get that there are some people who their strategy, and it's different for every field. Like you have to understand that like every field is going to get a different amount of publications per year, etc. But I hate the idea that we measure productivity on a number, a quota divided by a denominator of time. Like that, I just hate that idea because science should be about solving big problems. It should not be about producing minutia that can be written in a weekend. So I'm already like not liking this, but I do acknowledge like there are different strategies. People certainly can be successful by just like sometimes if you just throw a dart at the wall a whole bunch of times, maybe like one of those will give you a bullseye. That's the strategy for some people. So I'm not going to hate on it, but that's not how I do science. That's not like how it's ever worked for me.
And in working with new graduate students, I've learned that there's a lot of fear and trepidation, and at the same time excitement about writing a research paper, especially the first one.
The first one is the hardest. I do tell that to my students as well. Like once you do it for the first time, it gets easier, but the first one is the hardest. That's true for sure. And it's also, you're just so naive until you write the first paper. I just remember writing my first paper, submitting it, and just getting attacked by the reviewers who just tried to reject the paper. And I was just thinking like, dude, I'm just trying to like start in science. No reason to attack this paper so severely in such a low tier journal. That was my first impression.
And I want to see if I can make it an enjoyable and productive experience for you. I believe that it doesn't take that much time to produce a first draft, and that's what I'm going to focus on this afternoon.
Okay, so I get it. Now, he's saying just writing the draft, how to write a draft in a weekend. I would agree with that. You can probably write a draft in a weekend, but that presumes you've done the intellectual work for years to that. Like I can write a draft in a weekend now because like my knowledge of the field that I'm in is like, it's right at the top of my head. But if you were just starting, like you just don't have the infrastructure. You need to be reading papers once a week, if not once a day, to build up the mental infrastructure to be able to kind of like do that.
Is how to produce a first draft, which is really important. I think one of the biggest problems in writing a research paper, certainly the first one, is suppressing the urge to procrastinate and put off beginning the work. And that's part of my strategy in the way I approach it.
The one thing about writing for sure is, for me, I can't intermix writing with other things. I can only spend like a day writing and nothing else. Like I have never ever been able to intermix. So if I'm writing, sometimes I can only do it by dedicating, okay, I'm going to dedicate the morning, or I'm going to dedicate the day, or most of the time what I do is I go into a writing phase. Like if I'm writing a grant, I'll be like, okay, I'm going into writing phase. Don't talk to me for the next 2 weeks. I'm gone. I'm writing. That's what I'm doing. And that's my focus. That I think is a good way to suppress what he's talking about, the urge to procrastinate. Like you just dedicate, like, this is the week that I'm doing it. You lock yourself in a room
and you don't come out
until you have progress. That's what I do.
Writing research papers. So before you get ready to write the paper, there are some important preliminaries. Number one, you should review your own notes that you've taken on papers that you've read that are relevant to the work that.
Okay, this I agree with. So definitely what you need to do, and what I've done, so this is true, is as you're reading papers every week or every day, don't just read the paper, okay? Don't just like read the paper and expect, oh, this is going to be like absorbed into my mind. You need to read the paper and you need to circle the things that you think are most important for your research, look at the data, see if you agree with those few things, and then essentially like you can extract the useful information from that paper that relates to your project. And then you accumulate bullets. Oh, this line comes from a citation of this paper, and this can, essentially like a whole bunch of those bullets can become the infrastructure of a paper, or can become the infrastructure of a chapter in a thesis. So for sure, don't just read a paper, accumulate like a detailed, like, this is what I learned from that paper, and this is how it relates to my work citation. Accumulate those files, and then you can write real quick. Don't ever do things like where you're going to have to do it again later. So if you read a paper, you don't take notes, you don't keep track of your notes, you're going to have to read that paper again. Even if you remember, oh, I think this topic was covered in this paper, you can never just like cite it. You're always going to have to double check. So if you write it down the first time you do it, it eliminates the amount of time you have to check yourself and redo things.
You're writing up, and you should renew your literature search. This is very important to have this done before you start writing your paper. The second preliminary issue is very important, and it goes back to high school, and that is you need to determine who your audience is. I'm sure you were taught this way back when. And this is important in writing up a research paper. You need to know what the purpose of the paper is. Is it a research paper? Is it a review paper? Is it a tutorial paper? What journal is it intended for? Are the primary readers of the paper going to be undergraduates or researchers? But as always, with any paper, the real primary reader is the reviewer. These are the gatekeepers, and it is very important that you address their concerns, and the more you can get them addressed in the first draft, the better off you are.
He's starting to piss me off. He's starting to piss me off more. Like, I get what he's saying. Yes, like the reviewers can just reject your paper. So if you don't sort of like write it to the reviewers, you might not get it published, period. But I hate this. I hate this about science. Most of the people who review your paper are
Complete idiots.
They won't understand it. They won't have, and it's understandable because you have spent 2 to 5 years working on this project, maybe even 10 years of your life working on this project. And the idea that somebody can just come in and read your paper and understand everything about it and all the details in a matter of 4 hours, if you have a good reviewer, like some reviewers won't even give you that. Some reviewers will give you 20 minutes, read the abstract. Like the idea that they can understand it is just like, it's not, they can't, they don't. And I don't know if there's a better system or not, but what I hate about science and what I hate about this is the idea that if you are truly an expert in the field, if you are truly at the top and you are truly working on novel ideas, new stuff, nobody else is going to have the infrastructure to understand that. So the idea that you have to dumb it down and like cater
To these morons.
who aren't sort of like up to date is stupid. I hate that. I hate that. It might be true, but I
Fucking hate that.
about science.
in finally getting the paper published. So, preliminaries don't count for the weekend that you're going to write your paper. You've got to have your preliminaries done. Okay, now before getting into the details, I want you to understand what I consider to be the big picture. First of all, producing your initial draft is the creative part of the job. And what I want you to do, what I think you need to do, is resist the temptation to correct mistakes as you produce this first draft.
Okay,
Your job
useful.
now.
That's useful advice. You definitely like when I write a paper, I will do like scaffolding. So like I will write again, once you have the mental infrastructure, if you've done the readings and you kind of like know your field, you can just write lines. And what I'll do is like I'll write this and then I'll write in a parenthesis and I'll mark it red, get the reference. Something, 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 get the reference. Something, 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 get the reference. And all these things, again, like if I make an error or if I'm like make a factual mistake, I'm not really worried about it. Like I'll catch that later for sure. It is just about getting the framework down. Here's line one here. Like here are the ideas. Here are the ideas that are promoting the organization of this paper. And then later, yeah, you come back in, you fill in the details. I mean, sometimes I even write sentences like if I know something is kind of like directionally true, like I know this is true, but I don't know the specific details about it, I will write something like, it is true that X parameter does Y phenotype, blah, 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 something, and I'll leave it like X and Y, and then later I come back in and like fill it in because I know like the concept is directionally true, and I don't worry about it at the point of just like getting the ideas down, getting the frame of the argument down. That's true. That's good advice.
Is to produce a complete first draft not a perfect first draft.
Yeah, agree.
Editing is the second stage of the work. It is the critical thinking, analytical part of the job, and editing at this point, before you've completed your first draft, is a waste of time. Fixing a
It's definitely true, because like, if you haven't written one, you don't know this yet, but if you're working with a PI, you're going to write a draft, you're going to send it to the PI, and that PI is going to drastically change everything in it, and you're going to be like, I don't even know why they changed this stuff. Sometimes they're just nitpicky, sometimes they have their own way of saying things. Some PIs are more intense into the writing, some PIs are not, and some PIs are really, really, really fantastically good at writing. You have to acknowledge that. You have to understand that you have to be humble, and you have to acknowledge that you coming into this, you're not going to be that great of a writer. Like, I always thought I was a good writer, and I always have a little bit of like singe, little pain when something of mine gets edited, because I have this vision of me being a great writer, but I know that what's in my head, like what I know in my head, the neurons that I have in my head, the pathways, the connections that I have in my head are not the same pathways that are in your reader's head or in your PI's head. And so when somebody adjusts a sentence, it's not in many times it's adjusting it in a way so that the broader people can understand it. It's not that it's necessarily written improperly or written wrong. Anyway, I don't know, I'm going on a tangent here.
sentence and making it perfect if it never appears in the paper because it turns out to be irrelevant.
Oh, it'll get changed. Yeah, his point is like it's going to get changed a lot. So don't worry about the nitty-gritty right now in the first draft. Like, just get the outline.
Is a waste of time. Okay, so over the years,
he's got detailed notes.
I've developed an algorithm, and I've talked to a number.
I like the algorithm. Okay, let's hear the algorithm
of my colleagues, and many of them use the same algorithm.
Okay, let's hear it.
And it runs roughly as follows.
The algorithm. Number 1.
Just get started. Don't procrastinate. Get something down on paper.
So that's a good idea. Okay, and actually, there's I watch Scott Adams a lot. I love Scott Adams. His view is very similar. And if you want to like write a book, the first thing you need to do, again, like the whole task is just so intimidating. You need to break it down into the most infinitesimal steps. And this is true for life and anything that you're going to do. Anytime you have to do a monumental task, you need to just break that task down into the tiniest, the most tiny thing that you could possibly do, and just start with that. So if you're going to write a book or write a paper, all you need to do is open up, like today, all I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a file. I'm literally going to open up a Word file. I'm going to create a folder that's going to hold this document, and I'm going to save it as like a pseudo title. Like I'm just going to open a file and save it. That'd be the first thing like you got to do. You can do that. Anybody can do that. And at least that's a start. And then the next day you come in, you say, okay, I'm going to open up that file. I'm going to type
one sentence.
And if you can just type one sentence, then you've broken the barrier of the blank page. Like you've broken the barrier, you've already started. So starting is intimidating. That is true. It's true for everything. Starting is the hardest part. Break it down into infinitesimal steps. And then when you get better, you can just
grow up a little bit, and you can just be like, I'm fucking sitting down and I'm gonna write this whole fucking thing right now. Like this
badass guy, or on the weekend.
Number 2, you need to work from an outline. The reason an outline is important is you may not finish the paper in one sitting. You probably won't finish the paper in one sitting.
I don't do this. I free flow it. I don't have to do that. I don't know.
And if you've got an outline, you can pick the work up back where you finished before.
Maybe I feel like outline is too broad. Like I definitely like if I'm thinking about like what I do is I segmentalize it. So I'm thinking like, okay, materials, methods, introduction, discussion, results. I will start with either the introduction or the results, probably the results. I would start with the results. So here I'm going to disagree with this person. I would not start with an outline. You can't write a paper unless you have results, unless you're writing a review or something. But like what you do is you start with the results. and you essentially, like, in a single few sentences, what does your data show? What are your conclusions? That's the framework from which you start. And then the results dictate your introduction, because your introduction is going to be reflective of the material that the reader needs to know to understand those results. So start with results, pop to introduction, and then you can fill out the rest of the paper. Do discussion last, materials, methods, like whenever. I don't think you need a full outline, but I will outline a little section inside of, like, okay, here's my outline for my introduction. They got to learn about this, then they got to learn about this, then they got to learn about this, and then they got to learn about this. And then once they know these things, they can understand this. They can understand the shit. So maybe make an outline for like segments, but not I don't think you need a full outline.
You're not going to have to read it over. You're going to know where to begin. The third part of this is that the outline is easy to do, so it's actually fun to write an outline. Before you have a paper to write in your head, you've got your data. You've got your tables of data, you've got your figures. Take those and put them in order. Arrange them in some logical sequence, much like you might arrange them for a talk.
If you've never done this, watch videos on YouTube at 2 times or 1.5 times the speed. You can learn so much information. Like, this guy's already boring me. Like, let's go a little bit faster here.
And that list of figures and tables in order
it's also a lot
is
more
really the
funny.
outline for the paper. Now, the next point is the following. Do not write the introduction to the paper at this time.
Oh my God. Well, I said write the results first, then write the introduction. Why can't you write the introduction?
The introduction is the hardest part of a paper to write.
No, it's not. I think the abstract is the hardest part to write, not the introduction. The introduction, you have plenty of space. The abstract is the most technically difficult and the most skillful thing that you need to write, because it needs to be a condensed, attractive summary in the most minimal, simplistic form. Abstract is far harder than introduction.
So don't start there, because the urge to procrastinate is going to kick in again. The easiest part of the paper to write is the experimental. It's the part of the paper that you're most familiar with. You've done the experiments.
Yeah,
you know
that's
how
what
they're
I
done.
said.
So write the experimental, and you will be moving forward.
Yeah, so he's agreeing with what I said. Write the results first.
It's an easy part to write. The next part of the paper that I would focus on would be the results and discussion, following the outline that you created from...
Wait, like, what does he say? What is experimental? Does he mean methods? I would not start with methods. Methods are like the most boring thing to write. Like, if I'm thinking to myself, like, God, like today I gotta write, if it's the day that I have to write the methods, that is the day that I'm going to procrastinate, because the methods are the most boring shit ever. But maybe, like, I don't know, maybe that's the least intimidating thing for a graduate student, because that's the thing that they did. So maybe they're more comfortable with writing the methods, but methods are so boring. I mean, I would not start there. So I'm already disagreeing with the algorithm.
Your list of figures and your list of tables. This is a little bit more difficult to write than the experimental, but you're really getting started now.
Start with the results.
Okay, so basically you've got a draft consisting of the experimental and the results and discussion. Once that's done, the really hard part of writing kicks in, and that's doing the hard critical editing. But you've got the first draft, and that's the important thing. Now the critical part is when you convert that into clear, concise, and coherent English, and make sure that the science that you've written is correct. The final part of the algorithm is the cleanup. Write the conclusions. Personally, I like conclusions or summaries that is a numbered format. Conclusion 1, conclusion 2, conclusion 3, where these.
I don't see that very often. It's nice, and maybe it's nice in the sense of like a bullet thing. Maybe that's a chemistry thing. I don't know. I never see like number 1 conclusion, number 2 conclusion.
Are quite clearly separated from one another, and it's easy to see the contributions of the work. Now we have to do the introduction. And there are 2 very important things that need to be covered in the introduction. Number 1, why was the study done? What is its purpose? Number 2, you've got to collect the relevant, essential background information and put that together in the introduction.
So he's framing the introduction as, okay, why was the study done? So the other way to say that is like, what's the problem? What is the problem you are trying to solve? I think that's a better way to say it. And then the background, but here's the key, is only background that is sufficient to understand the results. Like, I don't want to read your thesis. I've said this before in a previous video. I don't want to read your thesis. Just give me the stuff that's sufficient to understand the data.
You need to be able to give the readers a sufficient background to understand what you did. So the very last
What did I say?
step in following this algorithm is producing the references for the paper. Actually, I think it's a good idea for you to write some notes as you go through the first draft of the manuscript.
Let me just say this about references. The earlier you learn a reference manager, the better. Like when I went through my PhD, I never had one. I literally hand wrote all the references. That was the dumbest thing I've ever done. As soon as I got started my postdoc, I learned how to use a reference manager and never went back. Start with a reference manager. Makes your job 1,000 times easier.
Indicating what references might be needed, what they would be about, but not to stop and collect the references at that time, because it's just going to interrupt the entire flow of the work. But when a manuscript is just...
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like if you have your thought, right? Thought, find a reference for this. Thought, find a reference for this. Don't find the references until later. Or like you might, if you're really good in the field, you might know what they are. So you're just kind of like, oh, I think it's this one. I think it's this one.
About finished, you need to get the exact references so that the reviewers and the readers can really find the information without trouble. It's extremely annoying to reviewers and readers when these are not done properly. So basically, you've got the job done now, and I want to leave you with a few.
People are nitpicky about references. This is an interesting conversation in a sense of like what constitutes a reference. I've never been taught that, and I also like there's different ideas. Like I will cite papers even if I pull out, like I said, a sentence from that paper. Like if I was reading somebody's introduction and they had what I thought was like a novel idea, I will cite that paper as like the source of that idea, not necessarily the focus of that paper in terms of its data or whatever, but even if I like encountered an idea in that paper, I will cite it. And some people might not like that. So I guess I have a very liberal sense of referencing. My sense of referencing is like if you find a little chunk that you want to use from a paper, that's what I tend to be referencing a lot, is these little chunks. Maybe this figure had like 8 figures, but I find this particular piece of this particular data set in figure 1 important. So I cite for that little piece. Other people will cite kind of like the broad theme of like this topic was analyzed in this paper. I don't do that. I tend to do a very, very liberal referencing, or maybe you could see it as the reverse, is very, very specific in a sense, like these particular ideas come from these papers, but people use references in a different way is what I'm saying. I'm not sure that's consistent.
Final words. There's an old saying attributed to Sir Francis Bacon: "Reading maketh a full man, conference a ready man, and writing an exact man." And each
what
of
did he say? Reading maketh a full man, conference a ready man. I don't even conference. Alexa, define conference.
As a noun, conference is usually defined as a meeting for consultation or discussion. As a verb,
Alexa, stop. I don't like this quote. What is it saying? Reading make a full man. So like talking to other people makes a ready man, and writing an exact man. Writing for sure does make you exact. I also don't like the reading. There's a lot of philosophers who would disagree with that quote. Sometimes people read too much and they fill their brain with idiotic ideas. They read. There's some people in the field, you're going to learn this, and this bothers me more than anything. There's some people in the field who read every single paper and take it for truth. And then when they critique your paper, they say, how come you didn't cite this paper? How come you didn't cite this paper? And it's like, well, I didn't cite that paper because it's an idiotic paper where they do stupid experiments and you don't learn anything. That's why I don't cite that paper. So I'm literally going to ignore it because it's trash. I ignore trash. So some people read too much. You have to be careful. If you fill your brain with too many ideas, you can't think for yourself. So yes, like you want to learn the background of your field, but you also need to be able to disregard that completely and like think of your own ideas, or you will get nowhere new.
those things that we do in doing science, we talk to our fellow scientists, we go to conferences.
I also don't like this. Because every time I would present my stuff, like people would not understand it. If you're really doing novel shit and you're at the edge, you're doing people don't always get it at first pass. It takes a while to sink in. It takes 5 to 10 years for your stuff to sink in. So like, I don't know. I just don't like the idea that science is not by consensus. Science is not a vote. The person who got it right is the person who got it right. It's not about what the field thinks who got it right. It's like somebody got it right and everybody else got it wrong. It's typically how it happens. And it usually takes 10 to 20 to 30 years for those other people to figure out, oh shit, they got it wrong. So science is not a vote. It's not about talking to other people and like, is my idea correct? No, like your idea, your idea is correct if you have convergent data sets telling you that this idea is true, not because other people think it's true.
Do a lot of reading, but in producing a paper for publication, that's when we want to focus on our critical skills, when we want to make sure that our scientific arguments are correct and logical. So writing is the most exacting part of what we do as a scientist. Some final points. Always review the manuscript requirements for the journal of interest. There's no point in writing a paper that doesn't follow the manuscript requirements. It will probably be returned unreviewed.
That's not true. That is not true. So when I've submitted to the highest tier journals, when we submitted to Nature, when we submitted to Science, there are many rules that we blatantly, literally ignore strategically for strategery, because the first thing you need to get past is the editor. The second thing you need to get past is the reviewers. And the last thing after acceptance that you need to get past is the formatting. I don't give a shit about formatting when I first submit. I want the data, the paper to look nice. I mean, I will within reason try to follow like word limits and stuff. But if you're like, if at a first submission, am I worried about like, oh, they only require like 30 references? No, I am not worried about that. I am much more worried about not citing a reviewer and pissing them off and having them reject my paper. So I will boatload it with 100 references and send it in. And then like, because if think about it from the editor's perspective, an editor is not going to turn down a paper because it has 100 references as opposed to 30. They're just going to say like, review this. If it's good, take the references out later. Like that's how it works. So like, I don't think you need to be obsessed with the formatting. Like you should try to follow it to an extent, but you don't need to be obsessed about it. Now grants are different. Like you definitely need to follow the formatting on the grants. And I try to a T, but not necessarily on papers. I try to get the story and the imagery and the cohesiveness of the paper perfect. I submit that, and then I get it underneath the formatting requirements after it's accepted.
With a semi-nasty note from the editor. And
you'll get a semi-nasty note from the editor every time regardless. The editors are assholes.
And really, finally, I want to leave you with a few references on writing. There are some classic...
If you are reviewing my paper, I am not saying that you are one of those people. You are one of the special ones who are the best. And I think you're really one of the greatest people in your field. So ignore that if you're reviewing my paper.
Books here. There are some books very relevant to writing a paper on chemistry, and I want to point out a wonderful short paper by Professor Royce Murray, the former editor of the journal Analytical Chemistry, Skillful Writing of an Awful Research Paper, 7 Rules to Follow. This little paper is a gem. It in mock style tells you the worst things you can do in writing a manuscript. I hope that you'll find this helpful, and it was a pleasure being here.
Okay, I like this guy. He's a nice guy. I don't have anything bad to say about this person. Everybody's got their own ideas how to do science. So thanks, Professor Pete Carr, for submitting this video. It gave me something to react to. Hope you guys enjoyed the reaction. If you liked it, give me a like, give me a share, give me a comment. If you disagree with something, throw it in the chat, do a comment. Hopefully, I mean, this video might actually be helpful, again, for people. It is true that writing is intimidating. Your first paper is intimidating. Maybe this will help ease the friction a little bit, make it easier for you. All right. Happy Friday. Have a good day.
I shall meet death head on.